worst decisions in life often start with the phrase, "How bad could it be?" 6 months ago, I found out exactly how bad it could be when I decided to pick up a package from a dark web marketplace. I still check my locks 3 times before bed, still flinch at unexpected knocks on the door, still scan crowds for faces I hope never to see. Writing this down feels dangerous, but keeping it bottled up is slowly driving me insane. I'm just an ordinary bloke from Manchester, working graphic design, live in a small flat with my cat. Nothing special about me. I've always been fascinated by technology though. Built my first computer at 12, taught myself coding at 15, that sort of thing. This fascination eventually led me to the dark web about 3 years ago. At first, it was just curiosity, wanting to see if it was really as mysterious as people made it out to be. For the first couple of years, I just browsed anonymously, looking at marketplaces selling counterfeit goods, banned books, that kind of thing. Never bought anything, never interacted with anyone. Just a digital tourist, watching from a safe distance. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, isn't it? It pulls you in deeper and deeper until you're in over your head. It started after a bad breakup last year. I was feeling pretty low, spending most nights alone with a bottle of whiskey, browsing parts of the internet I probably shouldn't have been. There was this forum I frequented where people discussed hard-to-find items, vintage electronics, discontinued products, rare collectibles, the kind of stuff you can't just get on Amazon. One night, I saw a post about a retro gaming console that had never been officially released, a prototype that supposedly had games on it that were never made public. As a massive gaming nerd, this immediately caught my interest. The poster claimed to have acquired it from a former game developer and was willing to sell it for cryptocurrency. The price was steep, but non-outrageous, about £800 in Bitcoin. After a week of back and forth messages and too many late nights staring at my screen, I decided to go for it. I'd never made a purchase on the dark web before, but I convinced myself this wasn't like buying drugs or weapons. It was just a rare gaming item. The seller had good reviews from other forum members, and they agreed to a dead drop exchange rather than posting it, which felt safer somehow. For those who don't know, a dead drop is when the seller leaves the item in a predetermined location, and you pick it up after they've gone. No face-to-face meeting, no names exchanged, completely anonymous. The seller gave me coordinates to a location on the outskirts of Manchester, an abandoned industrial estate that had been scheduled for demolition for years but was still standing. I know how this sounds, red flags everywhere, but I convinced myself this was just how these transactions worked. The place would be deserted. I'd grab the package and be back home playing unreleased games from the 90s within an hour. The pickup was scheduled for 10 p.m. on a Friday in November. It was already dark by 4:30, and a light drizzle had been falling all day, making the streets gleam under the streetlights. I drove to a car park about half a mile from the location, figuring it would be safer to approach on foot. The rational part of my brain was finally raising some objections, suggesting that maybe meeting a stranger from the dark web at an abandoned factory wasn't the best idea I'd ever had. The industrial estate was exactly as depressing as you'd expect. Crumbling brick buildings with broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and rusting chain-link fences with no trespassing signs hanging at odd angles. The only light came from a single street lamp at the entrance and the occasional passing headlights from the distant main road. Following the GPS on my phone, I made my way to the specific building the seller had described. It was an old warehouse with most of its roof missing, the inside a cavernous space filled with shadows. The dead drop location was supposedly just inside the main entrance. behind the third column on the left, inside a blue plastic container. I switched on my phone's torch and stepped inside, the beam creating more shadows than it dispelled. The floor was littered with debris, broken glass, empty cans, chunks of fallen ceiling. Every step echoed in the empty space, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness beyond my light's reach. I found the third column, and sure enough, there was a blue plastic storage box behind it. It was smaller than I expected, about the size of a shoebox. I picked it up, surprised by how light it felt. This wasn't a gaming console, unless it was just components. That's when I noticed something odd. The box was warm, not hot, but definitely above ambient temperature, as if it had been sitting in a heated room rather than a freezing abandoned warehouse. I should have left right then, should have put the box down and walked away. But instead, I opened it. Inside was a single smartphone, not a gaming console, not even close to what I'd been promised. It was an older model, nothing special. The screen was dark, but as soon as I touched it, it lit up. No lock screen, just a video player already open, showing a paused video. The thumbnail was dark and unclear. Standing there in that cold, empty building, I pressed play. The video showed a room I didn't recognize, some kind of basement or cellar with concrete walls. In the center was a person tied to a chair, head covered with a black bag. Someone moved into frame, wearing gloves and a mask that covered their entire face. They held up a piece of paper with today's date written on it, then a second paper with my username from the forum. My blood turned to ice. I nearly dropped the phone as I realized what I was looking at. This wasn't a scam in the traditional sense. I wasn't being sold a fake item. This was something much worse. The video continued, showing the masked person removing the bag from the captive's head. I won't describe what happened next. I couldn't watch it all. I shut the video off after less than a minute, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel outside the warehouse. Multiple sets, getting closer. In a moment of panic-induced clarity, I switched off my torch, dropped the phone back in the box, and moved as quickly and quietly as possible toward the back of the warehouse. There was a door there. I'd noticed it on my way in. I had no idea where it led, but it had to be better than staying. I made it through the door, just as beams of torchlight swept into the warehouse from the main entrance. The back door led to a narrow alley between buildings. I ran, not caring about the noise now, just needing to put as much distance between myself and whoever had followed me there. I made it back to my car without seeing anyone, drove home with my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, and spent the night with my furniture pushed against the door, convinced that whoever had set this up would be coming for me next. The next day, after no sleep and too much coffee, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Best case scenario, the video was fake, some sick prank to scare dark web tourists like me. Worst case, I couldn't even bring myself to consider the worst case, that I had somehow, unwittingly, paid for someone to be hurt, that my Bitcoin transaction had funded something unspeakable. I spent the next week in a state of paranoia, jumping at every sound, convinced I was being followed. I changed all my passwords, wiped my computer, threw away the hard drive. I even considered going to the police, but what would I say? That I'd tried to buy illegal merchandise on the dark web and may have accidentally funded a violent crime. That I'd handled a phone that potentially contained evidence of such a crime and then left it behind. After a month of constant anxiety, I moved to a different city. I told everyone it was for a new job, but really, I just couldn't stand being in Manchester anymore. Couldn't walk past that industrial estate on my way to work. Couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It's been 6 months now. I haven't been back on the dark web, haven't even used Tor. I checked the local Manchester news obsessively for reports of bodies found in abandoned buildings, but nothing has ever come up that matches what I saw. Sometimes I manage to convince myself it was all an elaborate hoax, that the video was staged, the follow-up footsteps just a coincidence. But then I remember how real it looked, how the person's eyes widened in genuine fear when the bag was removed, how the phone was warm, as if it had recently been in someone's pocket, how specific the message was, with my username clearly displayed. I don't know if I was set up from the beginning or if I just got caught in something bigger and more terrible than I could have imagined. All I know is that the dark web isn't just some harmless playground for the technologically curious. It's a place where real people do real harm. And sometimes your curiosity can make you complicit in ways you never intended. I still have nightmares about that video. Still wonder who the person in the chair was and if there was anything I could have done to help them. Still wonder if somewhere out there, someone has my name on a list because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. So that's my story. A warning, I suppose, about the dangers of thinking you can dip your toes into the darker parts of the internet without consequences. Some things can't be unseen, and some curiosities come with costs far higher than you're willing to pay. I can't get the sound out of my head, the soft tap of an auction paddle against a palm. It's been 2 years, but I still wake up at 1 in the morning, drenched in sweat. You know how some memories just stick with you, no matter how hard you try to forget. The good ones fade away over time, but the horrific ones, those stay crystal clear. Every detail, every smell, every feeling of absolute terror. For me, it's the soft tap of an auction paddle that still jolts me from sleep. The sound of wealth deciding who lives and who suffers. I was working as a freelance photographer for a lifestyle magazine in London, specializing in those behind-the-scenes pieces about trendy bars and restaurants, the kind that make readers feel like insiders to some exclusive world. My editor had sent me to document the Wreathed Heart, this newly renovated Victorian pub in Whitechapel that had become inexplicably popular among finance types and tech entrepreneurs, seemingly overnight. It was late October, that liminal time when London transitions from merely damp to bone-chillingly cold. I remember the peculiar fog that had settled over the East End that evening, how it seemed to swallow the streetlights into hazy coronas. The pub itself was unassuming from the outside, just another historic building with glossy black paint and gold lettering, indistinguishable from 100 others scattered across the city. Inside was different, not what you'd expect from a traditional British pub. No dark wood or worn leather, but minimalist furnishings in blacks and whites, with these disconcerting anatomical drawings of human hearts framed on the walls. Not the cartoon Valentine hearts, but detailed medical illustrations, some showing dissections or peculiar conditions. I remember thinking it was an odd aesthetic choice for a place serving food and drinks. The manager who'd arranged the shoot was a woman named Eleanor, mid-30s, expensively dressed in that deliberately understated way that actually costs more than flashy clothes. She had this practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, like someone who'd learned human expressions from a manual. After showing me around the main bar area, she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that there was a private members' space in the back I should photograph later when it was empty. I spent the first hour capturing the usual shots, bartenders crafting elaborate cocktails, the architectural details, patrons enjoying their overpriced drinks, standard stuff. Around 10, the place began filling with people who looked like they'd just stepped out of boardrooms. Men in bespoke suits, women with that particular kind of polished appearance that speaks of serious money. They carried themselves with the entitled air of people accustomed to doors opening at their approach. What struck me was how they barely ordered drinks. They'd approach the bar, exchange a few words with the bartender, then be directed toward a dark hallway at the back of the pub. None of them returned to the main area. I thought perhaps there was a separate exit, or maybe some exclusive area where they could drink away from the regular clientele. Around midnight, Eleanor returned, seeming slightly tense as she informed me the private area was now available for photography. She led me down that same hallway the wealthy patrons had disappeared into, past the toilets and what looked like storage rooms, to an unmarked black door with a small digital keypad beside it. She entered a code, and I distinctly remember the sound. Not the electronic beep you'd expect, but a soft, mechanical click, like something much older than the sleek technology suggested. Beyond the door was a short corridor ending in another door, this one attended by a man who looked more like military personnel than a bouncer. Close-cropped hair, perfect posture, alert eyes that assessed me with unsettling thoroughness. Eleanor exchanged a few words with him, and he stepped aside, opening the second door. The space beyond was dramatically different from the minimalist modern pub we'd left behind. It was like stepping into a Victorian gentleman's club. Wood-paneled walls, leather armchairs, the air heavy with expensive cigars and whiskey. But something felt off about it, something I couldn't immediately identify. Perhaps it was how the atmospheric lighting seemed designed to obscure rather than illuminate, or how the room was arranged in a semicircle facing a raised platform area at the front, currently empty but spotlit like a stage. Eleanor instructed me to photograph the empty room quickly, explaining that it was a private auction space for rare collectibles and investments, only accessible to their top-tier members. She emphasized that I should focus on the architectural details and ambience, not any identifying features of the space that might appear in a magazine. I nodded, already framing shots in my mind, thinking this would make for an intriguing centerpiece to my article, the secret room that few knew existed. As I was setting up my tripod, Eleanor was called away by one of the staff. She excused herself, saying she'd return shortly, leaving me alone in that strangely oppressive room. I took the opportunity to explore more freely, noting details that seemed at odds with the rare collectibles explanation. A medical-grade refrigeration unit humming quietly in one corner. Several screens mounted on the walls but currently powered down. Small cameras positioned discreetly throughout the space. On the podium at the front sat an open laptop, its screen showing what appeared to be a spreadsheet with columns for numbers, dates, and what looked like cryptocurrency wallet addresses. Beside it was a stack of black leather-bound portfolios, each with a different Roman numeral embossed in gold. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced toward the door, confirming I was still alone, then carefully opened the top portfolio marked I. Inside were photographs and specifications, but not of art or antiques. The images showed people, men and women of various ages and ethnicities, each photographed in the same clinical style against a white background. Beside each image was detailed information: height, weight, age, blood type, medical history, psychological profile, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be an estimated resilience rating on a scale of 1 to 10. My mind refused to process what I was seeing at first, creating more palatable explanations Perhaps this was for some exclusive medical treatment program, or an elaborate reality show, or high-end surrogacy services. But the final page of the portfolio shattered any comforting illusions. It contained detailed pricing structures for what it explicitly called direct control sessions of varying durations, with higher rates for terminal experiences. I felt physically ill as understanding crashed over me. This wasn't an auction for objects but for people, for the right to torture and possibly kill them while watching in real time. The refrigeration unit suddenly made horrific sense. It wasn't for wine, but for preserving evidence or trophies. The screens would be for remote bidders, or for displaying the sessions themselves. I must have made some sound, some small gasp of horror, because the door behind me opened. I snapped a hasty photo of the portfolio's contents with my phone before closing it and pretending to adjust my camera settings. Eleanor returned with two men I hadn't seen before, both in dark suits, both moving with the deliberate precision of predators. She asked if I'd finished, her tone perfectly pleasant, but her eyes scanning the room, noting the portfolio that wasn't quite in the same position I'd found it. I forced a smile, saying I needed just a few more shots. My hands were trembling as I pretended to photograph a particularly ornate section of wall paneling. I could feel their eyes on my back, assessing, calculating. Eleanor mentioned casually that their event would begin soon, so I'd need to wrap up. She asked if I'd seen anything interesting while she was gone, her voice still conversational, but carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of threat. I lied, saying I'd been focused on capturing the unique lighting of the space. She smiled that same empty smile and said something about how people often found themselves fascinated by things they didn't understand in this room. As I packed up my equipment, moving with deliberate slowness to appear calm while my mind raced through escape scenarios, the door opened again. A stream of people began entering. The same wealthy individuals I'd seen earlier, now carrying small electronic tablets and what looked like auction paddles made of some dark material. Eleanor guided me toward the exit, her hand on my elbow in what might have appeared to be a polite gesture, but felt more like a restraint. As we approached the door, it opened to admit one last patron, a man I recognized with a sickening jolt. He was a tech CEO who'd been featured in the same magazine I was shooting for, known for his philanthropy and ethical business practices. Our eyes met briefly. Something in my expression must have betrayed my knowledge or horror, because his pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. He leaned toward Eleanor, whispering something that made her grip on my arm tighten painfully. We continued to the corridor, where the security man waited. Eleanor instructed him to escort me out through the service entrance since the event was beginning. Something in her tone had changed, a hardness that hadn't been there before. She reminded me that all the photos needed to be approved before publication, and that I'd signed an extensive NDA that covered not just images but any observations made on the premises. The security man led me down a different corridor, one that seemed to take us deeper into the building rather than toward an exit. My heart was hammering so loudly I was certain he could hear it. We passed doors marked with symbols rather than numbers, a circle, a square, a triangle, from behind which I could hear sounds that will haunt me forever. Not screams, which would have been horrific enough, but the muffled, desperate sounds of people trying not to scream. I knew with absolute certainty that I wouldn't be leaving through any service entrance, that I'd seen and understood too much, that I was being led to one of those rooms with symbols instead of numbers, to become part of the night's inventory. desperation makes you capable of things you never imagined. As we passed a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, I stumbled deliberately, apologizing for my clumsiness. When the security man turned slightly to help me up, I grabbed the extinguisher and swung it with all my strength at his head. There was a sickening crack, and he crumpled to the floor. I ran, no longer caring about stealth, simply needing to find a way out of this nightmare. I tried doors as I passed them, most locked, one opening to reveal a small room with medical equipment and restraints that made me slam it shut immediately. Finally, I found a door marked with the universal fire exit symbol, pushed through it, and found myself in an alley behind the building. I didn't stop running until I was back on a main road, surrounded by late-night revelers who had no idea of the horrors occurring just streets away. I hailed a taxi, giving an address nowhere near my actual home, constantly checking to see if I was being followed. That night, I copied the photo I'd taken of the portfolio to multiple secure locations, then erased all evidence of my assignment from my phone. I scrubbed my social media, packed essential belongings, and by morning was on a train to Edinburgh, where an old university friend had agreed to let me stay without asking questions. I spent weeks debating what to do with what I'd discovered. Going to the police seemed logical, but the man I'd recognized was connected to the highest levels of society and government. The NDA I'd signed contained language I now recognized as thinly veiled threats, and I had only a single photo as evidence, easily dismissed as a forgery or misunderstanding. Eventually, I created an anonymous account and shared what I discovered on forums dedicated to investigating human trafficking and dark web crimes. I included the photo, names I remembered, descriptions of the location and security measures. Some believed me. Others dismissed my story as paranoia or creative fiction. 3 weeks later, the wreathed heart was destroyed in what was reported as a gas explosion. No casualties, since it happened during closed hours. The news mentioned its popularity among London's elite and its unique Victorian interior that had been largely preserved during renovation. I knew it wasn't an accident. It was evidence being erased. Or was it because of my posts, or simply a planned relocation of their operation? I'll never know. Since then, I've been moving constantly, never staying in one place long enough to establish connections. I've changed careers, appearance, habits. I use only cash, avoid cameras, stay away from social media. But sometimes, in the faces of the wealthy and powerful on news broadcasts, I catch glimpses of expressions I recognize from that night. That same cold calculation beneath a veneer of respectability. I know now that there are spaces hidden within ordinary places where the elite trade in the ultimate luxury, complete power over human life, where suffering is commodified and sold to the highest bidder, where people like me, who stumble upon their existence, become potential inventory. Sometimes I dream of that auction room. In my dreams, I'm never the photographer, but the subject being displayed on that platform, facing a sea of expressionless faces holding black paddles. And in the front row always sits that tech CEO, smiling as he delicately taps his paddle against his palm, signaling his bid for the right to break me completely. I don't know if they're still looking for me. I don't know if my name is in one of those portfolios now, with my own resilience rating and price point. But I know that somewhere, perhaps behind another unmarked door in another ordinary establishment, paddles are being raised and lives are being sold, and no one who matters is doing anything to stop it. What happens when the AI shows you something you never intended to see? Something real that was never meant to be discovered? I've spent the last 4 months trying to convince myself it was all just a horrible coincidence, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I work as a graphic designer for a small marketing agency in Leeds. Pretty standard stuff. Logos, web layouts, social media graphics. Nothing groundbreaking, but I enjoy it. I've always been interested in new tech, especially anything related to art and design. When AI image generators first became popular last year, I was immediately hooked. Spent hours experimenting with different prompts, seeing what the algorithms could create. It was fascinating how they could combine concepts in ways I'd never think of. Like most people, I started with the mainstream AI art sites. You know the ones where you type in a prompt and get back something that looks vaguely like what you asked for. They were fun for a while, but I kept hitting the same limitations. Content filters blocking anything remotely controversial, long queues for image generation, restrictions on commercial use. That's when a colleague mentioned there were more advanced AI art generators on the dark web, ones without the safety filters, trained on unrestricted datasets. As someone who works with visual content professionally, I was curious to see what these unfiltered systems could create. That curiosity would turn out to be the worst mistake of my life. I wasn't completely new to the dark web. I'd browsed it a few times before out of curiosity, but never went beyond looking at marketplace listings and forums. I knew how to access it safely. At least I thought I did. I set up my VPN, fired up Tor, and started searching for these underground AI generators. It took a couple of evenings of browsing through forums and following links, but eventually I found what I was looking for. A site called Deep Dream. Not its real name, obviously. The interface was bare bones compared to the mainstream sites. Just a black background with a text input box and a few settings options. No account required, no email verification. The only unusual thing was that it asked for cryptocurrency payment per batch of generations, about £10 worth of Bitcoin for 20 images. I paid the fee and started experimenting. At first, I kept my prompts similar to what I'd use on mainstream sites: fantastical landscapes, cyberpunk cities, abstract concepts. The results were impressive, sharper, more coherent than what I was getting elsewhere. There was something off about some of the images, strange anatomical distortions, unsettling facial expressions, but I attributed that to the lack of safety filters. After a few nights of casual experimentation, I started getting more adventurous with my prompts. Nothing illegal or pornographic, but definitely pushing boundaries. Dystopian scenes, dark surrealism, body horror concepts that would be useful for a horror project I was working on as a side gig. The results were disturbing but fascinating from an artistic perspective. One night, about 3 weeks into using the site, I was home alone in my flat working late. It was around 2 a.m. and I'd had a few beers. Probably not the best time to be exploring the darker corners of AI art, but my inhibitions were lowered. I decided to experiment with prompts about pain and suffering, thinking I might get some interesting abstract representations that could inspire a series of graphics for a metal band's album cover. I typed in extreme human suffering, realistic, detailed, high resolution, and hit generate. What came back made me physically recoil from my screen. Among the batch of 10 images were several that looked like standard AI-generated depictions of torture. Disturbing, but obviously artificial, with the telltale inconsistencies you expect from AI art. But one image stood out. It didn't have the usual AI artifacts. The lighting was consistent. The anatomy was perfect. It showed a young woman tied to a chair in what looked like a basement, her face contorted in pain, with bruises and wounds that looked disturbingly specific and medically accurate. My first thought was that this must be a real photograph that had somehow been included in the training data. But that didn't make sense. It doesn't just regurgitate exact images from its training set. I stared at it, feeling increasingly uneasy. There was something about her eyes that seemed to be looking directly at the viewer, pleading. I decided to try again with a similar prompt to see if I'd get more photorealistic results. This time I tried human captive in pain, realistic, photograph quality. The new batch loaded, and my blood ran cold. There was another image of what appeared to be the same woman, but from a different angle, with different injuries. The setting was identical. Same basement, same chair, same rope bindings. My hands were shaking as I tried one more prompt. Basement torture victim close-up, realistic. The results included 3 more images of the same woman, in progressive states of injury. The final one showed her unconscious or worse. This couldn't be coincidence or some weird AI amalgamation. These looked like stills from a continuous sequence, like frames extracted from a video. The consistent lighting, the progressive injuries, the identical setting. It all pointed to something too coherent for AI to randomly generate. I closed the browser immediately and stepped away from my computer, feeling physically sick. My mind was racing with horrible possibilities. Had I somehow stumbled upon evidence of an actual crime? Was this AI being trained on footage from the dark corners of the internet that should never see the light of day? Or worse, was someone using this platform to distribute real footage disguised as AI-generated content? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe this was an elaborate hoax. Maybe the site was seeded with realistic images to shock users. Maybe it was from a movie or staged horror photography that looked more real than it was. I spent the next day distracted at work, unable to focus on anything but those images. That evening, I made the decision to go back to the site, not to generate more images, but to see if there was any information about how their model was trained or who operated the site. I needed to understand what I had seen. When I tried to access Deep Dream again, the site was gone. Just an error message where the page should have been. I tried searching the forums where I'd originally found the link, but any mentions of the site had been deleted. It was as if it had never existed. Now thoroughly disturbed, I decided to search news sites for recent missing persons cases involving young women. I didn't know what I would do with any information I found, but I felt compelled to look. After about an hour of searching, I found a news article from about 6 months earlier about a university student who had disappeared after a night out in a city about 40 miles from where I lived. The article included a photo. It was her, the woman from the images. Same distinctive eyebrows, same small scar on her chin. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This wasn't some elaborate prank or synthetic image. I had been looking at evidence of an actual abduction and worse. My hands trembled as I bookmarked the article, my mind racing with what to do next. Should I go to the police? How would I explain finding these images? Would they even believe me? Before I could decide, I received an email notification, a new message from an address I didn't recognize, just a string of numbers and letters. The subject line was simply curious. There was no text in the body, just an attachment. Against all better judgment, I opened it. It was an image of me sitting at my desk, looking at my computer screen. It had been taken through my window from outside my flat. In the corner of the image was a timestamp, It had been taken less than an hour ago. I shut down my computer, pulled all my curtains closed, and spent the night on my sofa with a kitchen knife beside me, jumping at every sound. In the morning, I called in sick to work and went to the police station. I told them about finding disturbing images online that I believed could be related to the missing student case. I didn't mention the dark web or the AI generation site, just said I'd found them while browsing an online forum. I showed them the news article I'd found. They took my information, but didn't seem particularly interested. They explained that they get dozens of tips about missing persons cases, often from people who think they've seen something online, without the actual images or specific information about where I'd seen them. There wasn't much they could do. I couldn't show them the images because the site was gone. I couldn't tell them exactly where I'd seen them without admitting to browsing parts of the dark web I shouldn't have been on. I left feeling frustrated and scared. When I got home, I found another email from the same address as before, this time with a different image. Me at the police station, entering the building. The message read, "Not smart. We know what you saw. We know where you live. Forget about it." I didn't sleep that night or the next. I changed all my passwords, covered my webcam, and kept my curtains closed at all times. I considered moving, but what good would that do if someone was already watching me? A week later, the local news reported that the body of the missing student had been found in an abandoned building. The cause of death wasn't disclosed, but the police were treating it as a homicide. They were asking for any information from the public. I should have gone back to the police then, should have told them everything. Consequences be damned. But the day the news broke, I received a package at my door. No postmark, no return address. Inside was a USB drive. When I plugged it in, it contained a single image file. Me, asleep in my bed, taken from inside my bedroom. That was 3 months ago. I've since moved cities, changed my name, deleted all my social media. I don't use AI art generators anymore. Don't browse the dark web. Don't even use the same programs or websites I used to. But I still feel watched, still feel like I'm being followed. I don't know who was behind that website or what their purpose was. Maybe it was a way to distribute evidence of real crimes disguised as AI-generated content. Maybe it was a trap to find witnesses they could silence. Maybe the images themselves were bait to identify people who would search for more. All I know is that somewhere out there, someone knows what I saw, and they know who I am. And every time I hear a noise outside my window or notice someone looking at me too long on the street, I wonder if they found me again. So if you're ever browsing the darker corners of the internet and come across something that doesn't seem quite right, something too real, too specific, too coherent, close it immediately. Because sometimes what looks like an algorithm's creation is actually evidence of something that was never meant to be discovered. And the people who don't want it discovered will go to any lengths to keep it that way. Okay, so this might just be me, but have you ever had a moment when your phone screen shows you something disturbing and you immediately check over your shoulder to make sure no one can see what you're looking at, even when you're completely alone? 4 months ago, I experienced something on the dark web that I've been unable to shake from my mind. So here goes. It started on an entirely ordinary Tuesday evening. I just finished a late dinner, microwave lasagna, nothing special, and was sitting on the toilet, mindlessly scrolling through my phone as one does. I'd been fascinated with the dark web for about a year by that point. Not because I wanted anything illegal, mind you. I've always been the curious type, ever since I was a kid, taking apart my toys to see how they worked. Studied computer science at university, worked in IT for 8 years now. I suppose that's why I first downloaded Tor. Professional curiosity, I told myself. A bit of a lie, that. I'd browse the dark web occasionally when bored, usually after a few drinks, mostly just looking at marketplaces selling counterfeit goods or dodgy pharmaceuticals. Nothing too sinister, though there was always that thrill of knowing I was somewhere I perhaps shouldn't be, like a digital urban explorer. That night, I'd had a couple of whiskeys after a particularly stressful day at work. My boss had been on my case about some server issues that weren't even my department. The bathroom was the only place my flatmate wouldn't disturb me. So there I sat, trousers around my ankles, scrolling through forums I had no business visiting. I'd found my way onto a forum I hadn't seen before. Black background, red text, very 90s web design. The site claimed to be for practical solutions to complex problems. Vague enough to sound legitimate at first glance. I was scrolling through thread titles, mostly stuff about bypassing security systems or creating untraceable identities, when I saw a post titled DIY Silence Methods. My finger hovered over it for a moment. The title was just ambiguous enough that it could have been about soundproofing a room or creating white noise to help with sleep, but something in my gut told me it wasn't. Still, curiosity got the better of me. It always does, doesn't it? I tapped the thread. The page loaded slowly. Tor's never been known for its speed. And what appeared made me physically recoil. The thread contained meticulously detailed guides for creating homemade torture devices. Not historical information or theoretical concepts, but step-by-step instructions with diagrams showing how to build tools specifically designed to cause pain, without leaving visible marks. Tools designed to extract information, while keeping the victim conscious. Tools designed for silence. I remember my bathroom suddenly felt very cold. The radiator had been on full blast. My flatmate always complained about my excessive heating bills, but I felt goosebumps forming on my arms. What disturbed me most wasn't just the content itself, but the clinical, almost academic tone, as if the author was explaining how to assemble IKEA furniture, not instruments of suffering. And worse still, with the comments beneath each design, users suggesting improvements or sharing their field test results. I should have closed the app immediately, should have deleted Tor, reset my phone, and forgotten the whole thing. Instead, like a witness to a car crash, I couldn't look away. I scrolled further, reading through post after post. People were casually discussing the merits of different techniques, like they were reviewing kitchen appliances. This method is too messy for apartment use. This one tends to cause unconsciousness too quickly. I found adding this modification extends the process by several hours. My stomach churned. The microwave lasagna threatened to make a reappearance. Yet I kept scrolling, telling myself I was just documenting the depravity, as if I were some sort of digital anthropologist studying the darkest corners of humanity. What a load of rubbish. I was rubbernecking at human suffering. That's when I noticed the view counter at the bottom of the thread. Only 3 people were currently viewing this horrendous content. The forum administrator, someone with the rank field expert, and me. 3 people in a hidden corner of the internet that should require specific knowledge even to find. I suddenly felt very exposed, like I'd wandered into a private meeting I wasn't invited to. As I was about to close the app, a notification appeared at the top of my screen. A private message. The username matched the field expert, currently viewing the thread. My thumb hovered over the notification. Every instinct told me not to open it. But again, that damn curiosity. I tapped it. First time browsing our resources. I notice you've been on this page for 16 minutes, looking for something specific. I offer practical demonstrations for serious clients. My blood ran cold. 16 minutes. Had I really been staring at this horror show for that long? And what did they mean by practical demonstrations? I didn't respond, immediately closing the app and shutting off my phone entirely. I sat there in the bathroom, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. Trousers around my ankles, the faint drip of the leaky tap, the only sound breaking the silence. I finally gathered myself, washed my hands thoroughly, as if I could somehow clean away what I'd seen, and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept thinking about how the person had known exactly how long I'd been viewing the thread. Was there some tracker embedded in the page? Had I compromised my anonymity somehow? I told myself I was being paranoid. The dark web is supposed to be anonymous. That's the whole point. This was probably just a scammer trying to frighten naive browsers into paying for services that didn't exist. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing to worry about. Just another internet weirdo trying to seem more dangerous than they actually were. I went to work, had a relatively normal day, and had almost put the incident out of my mind by the time I got home. Almost. That evening, I received an email to my personal account, not my work email or any address I'd ever used at all. The subject line, regarding your interest in silence methods. The body contained only an attachment, a PDF. I scanned it with 3 different antivirus programs before opening it. It wasn't malware, it was worse. The PDF contained a customized silence method, tailored specifically for someone matching my exact physical description. Height, weight, even the small scar on my left wrist from a childhood accident. The document detailed how my apartment layout, which it described with disturbing accuracy, would provide optimal acoustics for the procedure. It mentioned how my neighbor's hearing impairment would be advantageous. It specified which of my kitchen implements would be most effective. I felt the world tilt sideways. How could they possibly know these things about me? I'd been so careful with my identity online. I'd used Tor correctly. I'd never entered personal information. My hands shook as I deleted the email, then emptied my trash folder, as if that would somehow protect me. I spent that night at a friend's house, making up some story about a water leak in my flat. I didn't sleep. Couldn't even close my eyes without seeing those diagrams, now with my face superimposed on the victim. The next day, I contacted my internet provider, changed all my passwords, and factory reset my phone. I convinced myself that someone had hacked my device, that it was all just an elaborate scam to frighten me. I almost believed it too. 3 days later, I came home from work to find my apartment door unlocked. Nothing was missing. Nothing was visibly disturbed. But on my kitchen table sat a small metal object I'd never seen before. It matched exactly one of the components shown in the torture device diagrams, a custom thumb screw with peculiar modifications. Beside it was a handwritten note. For your consideration. Field testing appointment scheduled for Friday. I didn't pack. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? That I'd been browsing torture methods on the dark web and now someone wanted to demonstrate them on me. I grabbed my passport, wallet, and the clothes on my bag. I drove straight to my parents' house in Scotland, 6 hours away, checking my rearview mirror the entire journey. I stayed there for 2 weeks, told them I was on holiday. When I finally returned to London, I moved to a new flat in a different area. I changed my phone number, email addresses, even deleted all my social media. I never went back on the dark web, never wanted to. It's been 4 months now, no more strange emails, no more unlocked doors or mysterious objects. I should feel safe, but I don't. Because here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. Whoever found me didn't do it through some dark web tracking. They found me in the real world. They had physical access to my home, which means they weren't just some distant internet bogeyman. They were close. Possibly someone I know. Possibly someone I still interact with every day. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the toilet, scrolling through perfectly innocent websites on my new phone, I'll remember those diagrams. I'll remember how casually people discuss methods of causing unimaginable pain. And I'll wonder if the person who sent me that PDF is watching me right now, silently testing my new security, waiting for the perfect moment to reschedule our field testing appointment. Because that's the thing about the dark web. It's not just some abstract digital realm separate from our everyday lives. The people there are real. They live among us. They could be anyone. The friendly IT guy at your office. The quiet neighbor who always nods hello. And sometimes, when you glimpse their other life, they notice you noticing them. And they don't like it one bit. So this happened about 3 years ago when I was still at sixth form in Leeds. You know how schools are about internet safety and all that? Well, there's a good reason for it. And I found out the hard way. I was in the library after hours, thought I was alone, and decided to check out the dark web. Biggest mistake of my life. I still get chills thinking about it. That night, I wasn't just browsing the dark web. It was browsing me back. I've never actually told anyone the full story until now. I kept quiet because, honestly, I was scared that whoever was watching me that night might find out. Even now, I still catch myself checking over my shoulder or covering my webcam. I guess I should start from the beginning. I was in my final year at sixth form college in Leeds, studying computer science among other subjects. I'd always been fascinated by technology. Probably to an unhealthy degree if I'm being honest. My parents had divorced when I was 14, and I'd retreated into the digital world as a coping mechanism. By 16, I was already fairly proficient at coding and had developed an interest in cybersecurity. It started innocently enough, learning about encryption, firewalls, that sort of thing. But as is often the case with teenage curiosity, it didn't stay innocent for long. I first heard about the dark web from a friend in my computer science class. He was always talking about conspiracy theories and government surveillance, most of which I dismissed as paranoid ramblings. But when he mentioned Tor browsers and onion routing, my interest was piqued. I remember thinking it sounded like something from a spy film, not something accessible to ordinary people like me. How wrong I was. It was mid-November, and the days were already darkening by 4 in the afternoon. I'd stayed behind after classes to work on a coding project in the college library. The library was housed in an old Victorian building with high ceilings and tall windows that let in very little light during winter months. By 5:30 p.m., most students had gone home, leaving the vast space eerily quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of the librarian restacking books and the soft hum of computers. I'd been working at one of the computers in the far corner of the library, tucked away behind several tall bookcases. It was my favorite spot because no one could see my screen unless they were standing directly behind me. In retrospect, that should have been my first warning. If I could hide my screen from others, others could hide their activities from me. I downloaded Tor browser onto a USB drive at home, bypassing the college's security protocols that prevented direct downloads. I wasn't planning on doing anything particularly nefarious, just exploring, seeing what all the fuss was about. I told myself it was academic curiosity, that I was a computer science student after all, and understanding all facets of the internet was part of my education. Such convenient justifications we create for ourselves. The library was practically empty by then. The only other person I could see was a first-year student dozing over textbooks several tables away. The librarian had retreated to her office. I plugged in my USB, launched Tor, and took my first steps into the dark web. At first, it was disappointingly mundane. Slow-loading pages with basic interfaces, mostly forums discussing privacy and encryption. I remember feeling slightly let down, thinking that this was what everyone was so worried about. But then I found a link to a directory of sorts, a signpost to the deeper, darker corners of this hidden internet. I started clicking through, fascinated by the sheer volume of illegal marketplaces, hacking services, and forums dedicated to activities I'd rather not detail. I remember the exact moment when things took a turn. I'd clicked on a link claiming to offer live streams of various security cameras from around the world. The page that loaded had a grid of thumbnail videos, some showing empty office corridors, others displaying street corners or the interiors of what looked like shops after hours. It was unsettling, but also oddly compelling. This voyeuristic window into places I'd never visit, and people who had no idea they were being watched. One thumbnail caught my attention. Unlike the others, which showed static scenes with occasional movement, this one had a red border around it and a counter showing how many people were watching. 23 at that moment. The thumbnail itself was dark, showing what appeared to be a dimly lit room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. The video expanded to fill most of my screen. It took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust to the low light, but gradually I could make out what seemed to be a bedroom. The camera angle was from a corner near the ceiling, pointing down at a bed where someone appeared to be sleeping. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. This wasn't some public security camera. This was someone's private space being invaded. I was about to close the window when the sleeping figure stirred, and I froze. It was a young woman, probably not much older than me. She sat up, checking her phone, completely unaware that strangers across the internet were watching her most private moments. I remember thinking I should close the browser immediately, that watching even another second made me complicit in this violation. But before I could move the cursor to the X, something in the live chat sidebar caught my eye. Someone with the username Observer Prime had written something that made my blood turn to ice. They somehow knew I was watching from Leeds College Library. They actually welcomed me to the show. How could they possibly know where I was? I hadn't entered any personal information, hadn't accepted any cookies or permissions. I frantically checked if my webcam light was on. It wasn't. Still, panic began to rise in my throat. I closed the tab immediately, hands shaking so badly I nearly knocked over my water bottle. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps the college's network wasn't as secure as it should be when using Tor. Maybe my IP address was visible despite the supposed anonymity. I told myself it was just a scare tactic, something to freak out newcomers. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I shut down Tor and was about to pull out my USB when a chat window popped up on my screen. This shouldn't have been possible. The college computers had all communication apps blocked. The message told me not to leave yet, that the show was just starting. I looked around wildly, certain someone must be watching me physically, playing some elaborate prank. But the library remained still and silent. The first-year student had left. Even the librarian was nowhere to be seen. I was alone, or at least, I appeared to be. Another message appeared, telling me to look back at the screen, that she was about to get a surprise visitor. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself reopening Tor, navigating back to the stream. The young woman was now sitting at a desk in the corner of her room, working on a laptop, headphones on. The view switched to another camera angle, this one showing her apartment door from the outside. A figure in a dark hoodie was standing there, quietly testing the handle. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips as they hovered over the keyboard. This couldn't be real. It had to be staged, some sick form of entertainment. But the terror felt authentic as the door slowly eased open, the woman completely unaware due to her headphones. I wanted to warn her somehow, to scream through the screen, but I was just another silent observer in this horror show. That's when I noticed something that turned my fear for her into fear for myself. In the corner of my screen, a small window had opened, showing me, from behind, at my library computer, in real time. I whipped around, nearly falling out of my chair. There was no one there, just rows of empty desks and bookshelves. But when I turned back to the screen, the angle had changed. Now it was showing me from the side, capturing my profile illuminated by the glow of the monitor. There had to be a camera somewhere, but I couldn't spot it no matter where I looked. The chat was active now, with multiple users commenting. Some were talking about having 2 shows for the price of 1. Others mentioned how the watcher becomes the watched. The most disturbing comments were asking which one they should visit first. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely use the mouse. I closed Tor again, yanked out my USB, and gathered my things to leave. As I stood up, all the computers in the library suddenly turned on by themselves, each screen showing the same image. Me, standing there, frozen in terror. I abandoned my belongings and ran, bursting through the library doors and not stopping until I reached the college's main entrance. Outside, the winter air stung my lungs as I gasped for breath, trying to process what had just happened. I was about to call for a taxi when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message said they knew where I lived too, but not to worry. They weren't visiting tonight. They liked to save the best shows for later. For weeks afterward, I barely slept. I reformatted my computer, changed all my passwords, even stayed at a friend's house for a few days. I couldn't bring myself to return to the library, making up excuses about illness to explain my absence from classes. When I finally did go back to college, I avoided all computers, completing assignments at home on a laptop I'd stripped down and rebuilt to ensure it had no webcam or microphone. The messages stopped after that first night, but the damage was done. I'd glimpsed a world where privacy was an illusion, where watchers could become the watched in an instant. I never reported what happened. Who would believe me? And more importantly, what if reporting it triggered whoever was behind those cameras to make good on their implied threat? That was 3 years ago. I've since moved cities, changed my name on social media, and adopted an almost paranoid approach to online security. I never use public Wi-Fi, keep my webcam covered, and regularly check for unusual network activity. Perhaps it was all an elaborate scare tactic, a way to frighten naive explorers of the dark web. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my flat late at night, I still feel eyes on me, invisible observers waiting for the next show to begin. So if you're reading this and feeling that same curiosity I once did about the dark web, take my advice. Some doors are better left unopened, because once you've seen what's on the other side, you can never unsee it. And worse still, once they've seen you, they never forget. The scariest part isn't what I witnessed that night. It's the knowledge that at any moment I might become the unwitting star of someone else's Red Room stream. And unlike that poor woman in the bedroom, I'd know exactly what that means. You never really know your neighbors, do you? I mean, we all have this idea that suburbs are these safe little bubbles where everyone's just living their normal lives behind their normal doors. Mowing lawns on Sundays, having barbecues in summer, that whole picture-perfect thing. That's what I thought about Cherry Lane when I first moved there. Just your average street in a quiet suburb outside Manchester. Decent houses, nice gardens, the occasional kid's bike left on a front lawn. Nothing special, nothing that would make you look twice. I bought my house there about 4 years ago after getting a job at the local university's IT department. Nothing fancy, just network security and maintenance. The kind of job where people only notice you when something stops working. The house was a decent semi-detached. Previous owners had done it up nice enough that I didn't have to worry about major renovations. Perfect for a single guy who'd rather spend his weekends gaming than fixing leaky pipes. The neighbors seemed friendly enough at first. There was this older couple next door who'd bring in my bins when I forgot. A family with teenagers across the street. A few young professionals like me scattered around. Everyone smiled and waved, but kept to themselves for the most part. Perfect for me, since I've never been the block party type. I remember thinking it was weird how quiet the street was at night, even on weekends. Most suburbs have at least some noise. Teenagers hanging out, the occasional party, cars coming and going. But Cherry Lane was different. After about 9 p.m., it was like someone had hit a mute button. No cars driving through, no voices, sometimes not even the sound of a TV through an open window in summer. I just figured I'd gotten lucky. Found a street full of early-to-bed types who respected the peace and quiet. The first thing that struck me as odd, and honestly, I ignored it at the time, was the internet setup. Being an IT guy, I naturally checked out the network infrastructure when I moved in. The whole street had this insanely good fiber connection, way better than you'd expect for a suburb this far from the city center. I mean, we're talking enterprise-level speeds. When I asked the installation guy about it, he just shrugged and made a vague comment about the area being part of a special regional upgrade. I didn't question it, just felt lucky to have such good bandwidth for my gaming sessions. It was about 6 months in when I started noticing other strange things, little inconsistencies that didn't quite add up, like how the houses all had these high-end security systems, not just alarms, but proper CCTV, motion sensors, the works. Strange for a neighborhood with practically zero crime. Or how almost everyone had blackout blinds or curtains that were always closed after dark. Or the way certain houses would have visitors only at specific times, never random drop-ins, always scheduled, always the same pattern. Being a bit of a nerd with too much time on my hands, I started keeping track of these patterns, just out of curiosity, you know. The family across the street, for instance, every Tuesday and Friday, they'd have visitors arrive precisely at 10 p.m. The visitors always parked around the corner, rather than directly outside. They'd stay for exactly 2 hours, then leave. Same routine, week after week. The house, 3 doors down, had a different schedule. Mondays and Thursdays, visitors between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. The older couple next door, Wednesdays, weekends off. It was like watching some bizarre shift rotation at a factory, except this was a residential street. I probably would have just written it off as some weird suburban swinger thing, or maybe a gambling circle, if it hadn't been for what happened with my Wi-Fi. Being in network security, I regularly scan my home network for intrusions or unusual activity, just professional paranoia, I guess. One night, I noticed something strange. Massive data uploads happening at regular intervals, not from my devices, but somehow passing through a hidden node on my network. Someone had piggybacked onto my system, but in a way that was incredibly sophisticated. They weren't just stealing my Wi-Fi. They'd actually created a secondary network that was using my connection as one of multiple routes. It was brilliant, technically speaking, routing data through several houses to mask the origin point, the kind of setup that would take serious expertise and coordination. My professional curiosity got the better of me, and I did something I probably shouldn't have. I set up a packet sniffer to see what kind of data was being transmitted. I expected to find evidence of some boring corporate espionage, or maybe someone running an illegal file-sharing operation. It took me a few days to accept what I was seeing. The houses on Cherry Lane weren't just homes. They were broadcasting studios for the darkest corner of the internet, red rooms, where people would pay to watch unspeakable things happen in real time. Each house had its own schedule, its own specialty, its own audience, and they were all connected through an elaborate network designed to hide the source of the broadcast from anyone investigating. I should have gone to the police immediately. That's what any normal person would have done. But two things held me back. First, I technically committed a crime by hacking into this network, and second, I had no actual proof of what was happening inside those houses. I'd seen the data, but not the content. For all I knew, I could have been misinterpreting everything. So I decided to gather more evidence. I set up a hidden camera, pointing out my front window, recording the comings and goings on the street. I kept logs of network activity, noted patterns of when broadcasts seemed to be happening. I even started taking evening walks around the neighborhood, trying to glimpse anything through windows or hear anything that might confirm my suspicions. That was my first mistake, showing interest. In a neighborhood built around secrecy, someone suddenly paying attention stands out like a spotlight in darkness. About 2 weeks into my amateur investigation, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere on Cherry Lane. The neighbors stopped waving or making small talk. Cars I didn't recognize would drive slowly past my house at odd hours. My bins would be searched before collection day, items moved around or taken. Small things that could be explained away but added up to a clear message. I was being watched. Then came the digital warnings. My personal account started showing login attempts from unknown locations. My home security system would report offline status despite being fully functional. Anonymous emails would arrive with no content, except my current location or a photo of me taken earlier that day without my knowledge. I was being hunted by people who knew exactly how to disappear others. The turning point came when I returned home one evening to find my front door unlocked. I knew for certain I'd locked it. I always triple-checked. Inside, nothing seemed obviously disturbed, but a network scan revealed a new device connected to my Wi-Fi. A small camera hidden in my living room, smoke detector. They'd been inside my house, studying me, assessing the threat I posed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, back against the wall, laptop open in front of me as I frantically compiled all my evidence onto an encrypted drive. The plan was simple. Leave at dawn, drive straight to a police station in another city, hand everything over, and disappear. Whatever was happening on Cherry Lane was bigger than me, more organized than I'd initially thought. As I worked, a notification popped up on my network monitor. Unusual activity on the street's shared infrastructure. Data rates spiking across multiple houses simultaneously, outside their normal broadcasting schedules. This had never happened before. All the houses were active at once, like some coordinated event. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as another notification appeared. Someone was accessing my home network, not from outside, but from one of my own devices. The camera in the smoke detector had been activated remotely. I was being watched right now as I prepared my escape. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It contained only a link, an onion address, accessible only through Tor browsers. Against every instinct screaming at me to ignore it, to grab my keys and run, I clicked the link. It opened to a streaming page with multiple camera views, all showing different angles of my house. My front door, back garden, the street outside, and most terrifyingly, my living room. Me, sitting there with my laptop, watching myself on the screen. In the corner of the page was a countdown timer, 003000, ticking down second by second. Below it, a viewer count rapidly climbing into the hundreds, and a comment section filling with messages in multiple languages. The title of the stream, displayed across the top of the page, turned my blood to ice. It announced a Cherry Lane special event focused on eliminating a security threat, with viewer participation enabled. This wasn't just surveillance, it was entertainment. I had been marked not just for removal, but for broadcast. The quiet, ordinary houses of Cherry Lane had synchronized their operations for a special feature presentation, and I was to be the unwilling star. I slammed my laptop shut, grabbed my car keys and the encrypted drive, and made for the front door. As my hand touched the knob, every light in my house suddenly went out. Not just electric lights. My phone died simultaneously, my smartwatch, everything electronic. An EMP device, professional grade, taking out everything with a circuit in a 10-meter radius. In the perfect darkness, I heard multiple cars pulling up outside, car doors opening and closing with soft, deliberate clicks, footsteps on gravel, approaching from both directions. The sound of my back door lock being expertly picked. They were efficient, I'll give them that. They knew exactly how to control a situation, how to minimize noise and struggle. I fought anyway, managed to injure at least 2 of them, before something pricked my neck, and the world began to dissolve around me. I woke up in a room I didn't recognize, yet somehow knew intimately from its dimensions and design. One of the broadcasting rooms I'd never seen but had tracked through network data. The encrypted drive was gone. My clothes had been changed. Monitoring equipment had been attached to my chest and head. To capture vital signs for the viewers, I realized with detached horror. A high-end camera sat on a tripod in the corner, its red light glowing steadily. On the wall, a monitor displayed the same streaming page I'd seen earlier, now showing me in this room from multiple angles. The viewer count had reached thousands. The comment section scrolled too fast to read, but I caught disturbing suggestions about starting with fingers and saving the face for last among the less translatable comments. In that moment, I understood the true horror of Cherry Lane. It wasn't just that some neighbors were running red rooms. It was that the entire street was a coordinated operation. Everyone was involved, from the elderly couple who'd helped with my bins to the family with teenagers across the street. The quiet suburb wasn't a collection of independent households who happened to be engaged in similar activities. It was a purpose-built broadcasting facility disguised as a normal neighborhood. They'd created an entire fake community, with each house serving a specific role in both the operation and the maintenance of the facade. Some houses were broadcasting studios, others were for technical support, others for security and surveillance. They'd even planted fake normal residents, like the older couple, to make the street appear more authentic to outsiders and new targets. And I hadn't stumbled into this by accident. My background in IT security, my living alone, my clean record and minimal social connections. I'd been selected, researched, and maneuvered into buying that specific house. They'd wanted someone with technical skills to maintain their network infrastructure, someone who wouldn't be immediately missed if they disappeared. I wasn't their first victim. I was their newest employee, expected to work until I became content. The door opened, and 3 of my neighbors entered, people I'd waved to, made small talk with, believed were just ordinary people living ordinary lives. They wore surgical masks and gloves, and one carried a case that opened to reveal medical tools arranged with meticulous precision. The last thing I remember clearly was one of them adjusting the camera angle while explaining to the viewers that tonight's broadcast would demonstrate the consequences of curiosity, teaching a lesson about why some doors should remain closed and some networks left unexplored. I'm only able to tell this story because I escaped. Not that night, but months later, after I'd been broken, after I'd been forced to participate in what happened in those houses, after I'd learned every technical aspect of their operation. I got out during a power outage caused by a winter storm, the only time their redundant systems all failed simultaneously. I took nothing except knowledge of what happens on streets like Cherry Lane. I live differently now, in a small apartment in a crowded city centre. I have no internet connection, no smart devices, nothing that connects to anything else. I change locations every few weeks, pay only in cash, use a different name each time. I write this on paper, transferring it by memory to a public computer that I will never use again. Because Cherry Lane wasn't unique, it was one of many. Their network data revealed connections to similar operations across the country, across Europe, a whole hidden infrastructure of ordinary-looking streets, where extraordinary horrors unfold behind drawn curtains. Streets designed to look normal from the outside, while hosting the most profitable form of entertainment for those with the darkest appetites and the deepest pockets. Sometimes, when I walk through residential areas, I find myself studying the houses, looking for the signs I now recognize all too well. The uniformity of security systems, the pattern of visitor arrivals, the quality of the internet infrastructure, the silence after dark. And sometimes I see a street that matches all the criteria, where every house has blackout blinds that close at sunset, where the residents move with the hyper-awareness of people who know they're always on camera, where normal neighborhood randomness has been replaced by choreographed ordinariness. When I find those streets, I keep walking and never look back. Because the most terrifying thing about places like Cherry Lane isn't what happens inside those houses. It's how ordinary they appear from the outside, how effectively they hide in plain sight, and how many of them exist in quiet suburbs just like yours. It's been 3 months since that night on my couch, and I still haven't used my laptop properly since. I've bought a new one actually. I just couldn't bring myself to even turn the old one on again. Some things you just can't unsee, and what I found in my own bookmarks folder still gives me nightmares. I've always been a bit of a tech hoarder. I'm the type who never deletes emails, keeps screenshots of everything, and has about 50 tabs open at once. My friends always joke about it, how I'll save articles I'll never read and bookmark pages just in case, but never actually go back to them. It's not like I'm disorganized exactly, just reluctant to get rid of things. My digital life is a bit like my flat in that way, cluttered but with a system that makes sense to me. I work in IT support for a small company in Sheffield. Not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays the bills, and I genuinely enjoy solving technical problems. I'd been with the company for about 4 years at this point, and part of my job involved testing different browsers and tools to make recommendations for our staff. That's my excuse for why I had so many random programs installed on my laptop anyway. That Friday night in January, I was just lounging on my couch with a beer, scrolling through Netflix, but not really finding anything worth watching. It was freezing outside, one of those damp, cold Yorkshire nights where the chill seems to seep through the walls. I'd pulled my favorite blanket over me and had the heating cranked up, just feeling a bit bored and restless. I decided to finally sort through my digital clutter, something I'd been putting off for ages. It felt like a productive way to waste time, if that makes sense. I started with my email, 16,000 unread messages, got overwhelmed immediately, and switched to something easier, my browser bookmarks. I use Chrome as my main browser, but I also had Firefox, Edge, and a few others installed for work purposes. I decided to go through them all, starting with the ones I rarely used. When I opened Firefox, I was surprised to see how many bookmarks I had in there. I barely even use this browser except occasionally for testing things. The bookmark folders were pretty standard at first: work resources, recipes I'll never make, holiday research from a trip I'd planned 2 years ago. But then I noticed one simply labeled utility tools. I didn't remember creating it, but that wasn't unusual. I'm always saving random software tools and then forgetting about them. When I clicked on the folder, there were only about 5 bookmarks inside. Most were what you'd expect: a password manager, a file conversion tool, some kind of coding resource. But the last one caught my eye because it didn't have a proper name, just a string of random characters followed by .onion. I'm tech savvy enough to recognize an onion address when I see one. It's a dark web address, the kind you need the Tor browser to access. But I didn't remember ever saving anything from the dark web. I'd heard about it, of course, and was curious about it, like most people in my field, but I'd never actually gone through the effort of exploring it myself. What was strange was that Firefox shouldn't even be able to open onion addresses without being configured specially. I figured maybe I'd set it up years ago and forgotten about it, or maybe the bookmark was just copied from somewhere as a reference. Out of curiosity, I clicked it, fully expecting to get an error message. Instead, a loading screen appeared. My heart did this weird little jump in my chest. Firefox shouldn't be able to do this. It shouldn't be connecting to an onion address. I'd never installed Tor or configured any special proxies on this browser. At least, I didn't think I had. Before I could process what was happening, the page loaded. It was a simple black background with what looked like a video player in the center. No text, no navigation, nothing else on the page. Just a video player showing what appeared to be a still image of an empty room, some kind of basement or storage area with concrete walls. There was a timestamp in the corner showing the current date and time. I remember sitting up straighter, the blanket falling off my shoulders, suddenly very alert. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe it wasn't actually a dark website, just something designed to look mysterious. I moved my cursor to close the window, but then the image on screen shifted slightly. It wasn't a still image, it was a video feed, and someone had just walked into frame. The figure was mostly in shadow, but I could make out a person moving around what looked like a workbench against one wall. They seemed to be arranging items, though I couldn't clearly see what they were. Something about the deliberate, methodical movements made the hairs on my arms stand up. This didn't feel like some random webcam feed or art project. There was purpose in those movements. I should have closed the browser immediately. Any sensible person would have. But there's this moment of paralysis that comes with seeing something so unexpected. Your brain needs to catch up, to make sense of what you're witnessing before you can react. The figure turned slightly, and light from somewhere off camera illuminated their face, or what should have been their face. They were wearing a plain white mask with just eye holes cut out. the kind of thing you might find in a craft shop, meant for decoration. The contrast of that blank white face against the shadowy room made my stomach clench. As they turned further, I could finally see what they had been arranging on the workbench. Tools, knives, pliers, what looked like surgical equipment, all laid out with careful precision. Next to them was something that looked disturbingly like restraints. That's when the reality of what I might be watching hit me. This wasn't just some weird art project or practical joke. This looked like preparation for something terrible. And somehow, inexplicably, I had a bookmark to it in my browser. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I got up and paced around my flat, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. How could I have a bookmark to something like that? I never visit the dark web. And how was Firefox even able to access an Onion address? After about 20 minutes of panic, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had used my laptop at some point, but I rarely let anyone borrow it. Could it have been a virus or some kind of malware that added the bookmark? But why would malware direct me to what looked like a live stream? I needed to check if what I saw was real. I opened my laptop again, but this time I didn't click the bookmark. Instead, I looked at its properties. The bookmark had been created 8 months earlier, according to the metadata. 8 months. I tried to remember what was happening in my life then, who might have had access to my computer. Then I remembered. About 8 months ago, my laptop had been stolen from my car. I'd reported it to the police, but miraculously, it had been recovered a week later. Found in a skip behind a shopping center across town. Nothing seemed to be missing or damaged, and I'd run antivirus scans that came up clean. I'd assumed the thief had just taken it, realized it was password protected, and dumped it. But what if they had installed something on it first? What if they had configured Firefox to access the dark web and left that bookmark deliberately? The thought made me feel physically ill. I'd been using this laptop for 8 months without realizing someone had tampered with it. What else might they have installed? Were they monitoring me? Had I been an unknowing participant in whatever disturbing thing I just witnessed? I couldn't bring myself to check the bookmark again. Instead, I shut down my laptop completely, unplugged it, and shoved it under my couch, as if putting it out of sight would somehow make what I'd seen less real. The next day, I took the laptop to a friend who works in cybersecurity. I didn't tell him exactly what I'd seen, just that I'd found strange bookmarks I didn't recognize and suspected my laptop had been compromised when it was stolen. He offered to wipe it completely and reinstall the operating system, which I gratefully accepted. When he was examining it before the wipe, he found something that chilled me to the bone. There was indeed a hidden configuration that allowed Firefox to connect to the Tor network. But more disturbing was a small program running in the background that seemed to be taking periodic screenshots and accessing my webcam. The timestamp showed it had been active since shortly after my laptop had been recovered. For 8 months, someone might have been watching me through my own laptop. Someone who was connected to whatever horrible thing I had glimpsed on that live stream. I've since bought a new laptop and taken every security precaution imaginable. I cover my webcam, use a VPN, and regularly check for any unusual software or connections. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched somehow. What keeps me up at night isn't just what I saw, or even the knowledge that someone had access to my computer for months. It's the question of why. Why put that bookmark there? Was it a mistake? Or was it deliberate? A way to show me they could access my personal space anytime they wanted. Were they trying to recruit me into whatever disturbing activity they were preparing for? Or was I somehow meant to be a future participant in a much more terrifying way? I'll never know for sure. And maybe that's the most disturbing part of all. That bookmark wasn't just a random link. It was a window into something dark that had been hiding in my own digital space for months, silently watching and waiting.